Welcome to Podfics Galore. I'm your horrible online reader, Goldskythe. I read out loud fanfictions for you busy bees, free of charge and no strings attached. Today I will continue reading the Silmarillion / Lord of the Rings fic by Bloodwing Blackbird from Archive of Our Own called And Now Each Night I Count the Stars. I hope you can at least try to enjoy my voice, and I will try my best for you with the equipment available to me. Note, this fic is rated explicit. On with the show. And now each night I count the stars. Chapter 23. Stop looking at me like that, Maklar demanded, not for the first time. Halbarad was not sure how he had been looking at Maklar. He had tried to school his expressions, not to react when Maklar snapped at him, not to allow any trace of pity to cross his face, and he thought he had done admirably. He even, mostly, remembered not to call him Blackbird. "I don't know you," he said in a harsh whisper that was still all that he could summon. "Stop looking at me like you care for me." "I don't know how to," Halbarad replied. "How to look at you differently, or how to not care. I'm sorry." Maklar's face was tight, the way it always was when he was in pain. Halbarad had seen it often enough in the last weeks, however much he tried to hide it. Once, he thought that he had seen Maklar's face in all its moods. The high blood of battle, the peace of song, disgust, rage, even treasured, in ecstasy, in joy. Those looks he knew, even if Maklar still did not know him, but the fear that still darted in his hands, fluttering up to shield his face, the shame that kept his shoulders hunched, the terror, raw and bleeding when Halbarad woke him from his dreams. All these he had not seen before, and he found himself paralyzed by them. He could find no words of comfort, and the things he wished to say, that he loved him, that he always would, that he had no need for shame before Halbarad. Those things only reminded Maklar of the nameless thing they both had lost. "Leave me be," said Maklar, and rolled over to face the window. "Ah, Halbarad, a moment." Light spilled from Elrond's door, golden and warm, near dazzling. Maklar's room was kept dark, for he said the light hurt his eyes. "Sit, please." He gestured, but Halbarad shook his head. "My back, it feels better to stand." Elrond smiled at that. "I quite understand. I've had complaints about those chairs before. I'll have something more comfortable brought in." It was a kind thought, but Halbarad couldn't summon much enthusiasm. Elrond noticed, as he usually did. "How are you, Halbarad?" "Well enough, I suppose." It was not much of an answer, and Elrond was sure to see through it. "He'd be disappointed, you know. You are a terrible liar." There was something wistful in Elrond's smile. "You are permitted to be angry at him." Halbarad turned his attention to Elrond's desk, where the whole vacant hornet's nest sat in a bowl, all its empty cells staring darkly at him, as if their inhabitants would still swarm forth at any moment. "Why would I be angry?" Elrond shrugged. "You would know better than I. It needn't be sensible. One could reasonably be angry that he left, that he did not ask for help, angry that he did not send word. That stung." "He did." "I suppose so, before he knew that he was going into danger. And, who knows, he may have sent word later, but if he had trusted Saruman to deliver it, well, that would be another thing that one could reasonably be angry at him for." "Why do you want me to blame him?" I'm saying this poorly, and perhaps I'm thinking most of my own feelings on the matter. What I want is for you to know that if you were angry, which I'm not saying that you are, that does not mean that you love him less." "You speak from experience, I take it." Elrond nodded. "He has changed, Halbarad. Even if he regains his memory, I do not think he will be quite the one either of us knew." "Are you telling me not to hope?" Halbarad's head was already swimming to weariness, and with tears he'd been unable to shed. Not when he could not show Blackbird how it broke his heart when he flinched away from him. He folded his arms and swallowed. I'm trying to tell you that you are permitted to have feelings about this. That if you feel you need to mourn what you have lost, that doesn't make you untrue to the Muckler who still lives. Elrond picked at the nest, peeling a strip of papery outer layer off with long fingers. You may find more than what you lost. Grief often holds unexpected rewards, but to grasp at the past, and to insist that he has not changed, that you have not been changed by this, that would be disservice to both of you. I have not changed. Not in the way I feel. Elrond smiled at that, a practiced sadness in his eyes as he tore a bit of the hornet paper into small strips, letting them fall, like snow, upon his desk. I used to think like that. I thought that if I could only love her enough, then it could be as if it had never happened. I thought that that was what would be the best for both of us. I thought that that was what would be the best for us both, for her to be healed so fully that it would erase what had been done, for us both to forget. Halbarad was silent for a long moment, his chest a swarm of emotions, not certain how or if he should reply to this. With a sigh, Elrond swept the little drift of paper up into his hand. It's not the only reason she sailed, of course, but she thought it would be easier to heal among those who would only know her as she was now, and she thought, I could only see her as she had been. Was she right? At the time, very likely. I'm sorry. Lessons that are hard to learn stick better. If I see her again, we shall begin anew. Do you think he will sail? Do you think he can? I have no way of knowing. I do not know if I can forget what was before. I don't think you should try to. I think that you will find your own way and make your own mistakes. I did not mean to say all that. Elrond paused and went to the window where he blew the bits of nest out into the night air and brushed the remainder from his hand. It's no great mystery that this would give you reason to think of her. I suppose not. What I wish to tell you is only that you must take care of yourself as well. That Muckler is not the only one with healing to do. I have done better had I understood this myself. I will try. Elrond ran his fingers across the carvings on the windowsill. I too. Sleep well, Halbarad. Muckler watched his hands when Elrond prodded him. His hands were safe things to look at, for he remembered them. My harp. He still could not make a sound above a whisper. But Elrond seemed determined that it would heal and plied him with honeyed drinks until he was sticky within and without, and he finally understood why hummingbirds were such damnably foul-tempered little things. Elrond's hands stopped in their ministrations, and Muckler clenched his hand around the sturdy tin cup. They had finally stopped wasting Elrond's glassware on him. This one had a better heft for throwing, in any case. What has become of my harp? What do you remember? Elrond asked, as he always did. I left it with Saruman, and a letter. He sat up so that Elrond could tend to his back. At least he could do that without help, a new skill, as of the previous day. His triumphs had become very small of late. We've only had the one letter from Lothlorien. What was this one? Trying to find that memory was like trying to hold smoke. He'd think he had it, the thought teasing at a spot that made gooseflesh rise on the back of his neck, a feeling swooping through his belly like fear, making his eyes water, and then disappearing, leaving him with the smell of smoke at the back of his throat. Answer my question, he said instead. Elrond rubbed at the space between his brows, then set his hand on Muckle's shoulder. My sons found it. It was broken. Michael shook off the false comfort of the touch. Where is it now? We gave it to Halbarad. It seemed right. Halbarad again. Michael had sent him away, only a few days ago, raging at his gentle hands, at the way he refused to blame Maklar, at the looks that said care but could not hide disappointment, at the voices that screamed at him whenever he thought he could remember being loved, that told him that it could not have been, that Michael could not be loved, had never been loved, that he did not deserve it when he was whole, so how could he let someone love him now? He had forgotten Halbarad. He wished he could forget himself. He wanted the world to believe him when he told them that he was nothing anymore, wanted them all to forget him, to let him go. They had been eager enough to do it once, so why they were trying to hold him here now? Halbarad should have forgotten him. Drink that, Elrond said, tapping him on the shoulder. Maklar grimaced and obeyed. Maklar spent many hours staring at the mountains that he could not reach. There was a bell on a table beside his bed, next to an ewer and the tin cup. He was to ring it if there was anything he needed, but he refused to touch the thing, staring instead at the clouds that formed against the wall of the mountains, only to drop their rainy burdens upon their flanks to fill the rivers of the north. Elrond's folk brought him books, small wooden puzzles, but they lay untouched. Once they had brought him a lute. Maklar had not been able to make it sing, but throwing it had produced a very satisfying racket. Too bad it had proved sturdier than Maklar and survived with only a few chips to its finish. Now it stood in a corner of the room, taunting him, out of reach. He had tried to stand on his own once, before he had made Halbarad leave. They had given him food, a thin, salted gruel of rice and broth, but it had been too much for him, and had made him ill, washing right through a body that no longer knew what to do with nourishment. Weak and poppy sick, he had fallen when he had tried to stand, and he'd had to stay there on the floor, tangled in the soiled sheets until Halbarad found him and cleaned him like a child. The bell had appeared soon after that. He was past that now, his head clear apart from the gaps in his memory and the dreams that could come upon him even during the bright summer days. Dreams of blackness with no feature but pain, of a twisted gash of a mouth whispering truths that everyone here was so determined to hide from him. It would send him skittering back to huddle against the head of his bed, whispering rebuttals that he did not believe until someone came to check on him, and he could turn the fear outward into rage. Now, though, he could sit without support for hours if he wished, could hurl his tin cup with enough force to dent the wall beside Glorfindel's head, even if he had yet to gain the speed and accuracy to actually strike him with it. Night had fallen and the clouds had rolled away. He could not lie still any longer. Elrond would have told him that he was not ready, would have insisted that he allow someone to help him, might have told him no, that he needed more rest. But Maklar was restless, and he thought that if he could not bring himself to some place that he could not see the great dome of the stars spread over him, perhaps he would die. The air was cool on his skin when he pulled the blanket aside and swung his right leg over the edge of the bed. The boards of the floor were worn, smooth and warm, but they felt strange and unfamiliar beneath his toes, his skin tender and sensitive. He sat there for a moment, staring at his red foot, at the skinny pale leg, the knobbly still bruised knee. It had never been a particularly beautiful sight, but even less so now that it was so lonely. He set his hands beside his thighs and pushed himself upright. The movement made his vision go black, but he held to the head of the bed, swaying until the blindness passed. His head still light, he looked around the room. It was not one he had stayed in during any of his previous visits to the valley, clearly intended as a place of healing rather than the more mundane sorts of guests. The bed was narrow and situated that one could approach it from either side. There was little other furniture but for a small cart nearby that bore rolls of clean white cloth for dressings and jars of salves. No puppy. He checked, opening each jar and sniffing the contents. There was a narrow couch where first Elrond and then Halbarden had spent many watchful nights. In the corner was a wardrobe with a tree carved onto the door. He could smell himself, and he smelled of sickness, of lying too long abed. He made his way to the wardrobe with small, careful hops, staying within arm's reach of the wall so that he could steady himself when his balance failed. Within he found, not the prize he had hoped for, but something better, his spear, and altogether unexpected, a battered straw hat, with a red ribbon woven around its crown, and a collection of buttons and beads strung haphazardly from the brim. Someone had added to it since he had seen it last. Shells, bits of colored yarn, a carcass of a lizard that had been left in the sun. He remembered a girl, all of freckles and laughing eyes, and a bag of hazelnuts, eaten in a tunnel beneath ruined Minas Ithil. It hurt to see it here now, a mockery of whatever he had been before. There was a glass set into the door of the wardrobe. Muckler paused, then opened it fully, and stared for a long time at the uneven crop of hair, suddenly sporting streaks of silver at the temples, at the brand of abhorred eye upon his left cheek, at the way the healer's tunic hung loose over his frame, while his skin stretched taut over knots of bone and sinew. It was his eyes that burned at him, their brightness a mockery of the deep hollows of his marked face. He took up his spear and left the room, ignoring the broken mirror behind him and the blood that dripped from his knuckles onto Elrond's clean floors. He made his halting way through the corridors of Imladris, his spear his support. He cast aside his garment as he went, for he would not show himself to the kindler in a shroud that stank of the grave. His dressings, too, he pulled off, one by one, leaving them where they fell. He had already been stripped, laid bare unwilling before strangers, humiliated before armies, flayed and quivering before the servants of the dark. What cause did he have to fear the gaze of the stars? Outside, the night was warm and full of song of frogs and cicadas. Tilion had sailed on, but farther stars filled the sky with enough light that he could see his own shadow wavering upon the stones of the path. He leaned his weight on the spear, and let the night air fill his shivering lungs with the lights of the stars. There was a song that night, thrumming beneath his skin, below the ground, behind the stars, and even if he could not be the one to sing it, it brought with it something almost like peace. It was Glorfindel who found him in the morning, still standing and watching as the last stars faded from the sky. He said nothing, only placed a blanket around Maklo's shoulders and led him away. He helped him to a terrace, almost as if he knew that Maklo could not bear to go back to his small room that smelled of medicine. He sat beside him on a cushioned bench, and did not remark on Maklo's shivering. Night had ended cooler than it had begun. "Do you want me to get Elrond?" he asked, gesturing to Maklo's hand. What had happened to his hand? He lifted it to look, making a fist to watch the bright blood well up from the cuts across his knuckles. "Is none of Elrond's glazing safe with you here?" asked Glorfindel. It was a jest, and Maklo was pitifully grateful for it until he went on. "Why did you break it?" "Too bright," Maklo rasped as he flexed his fingers and picked out a splinter of glass. Glorfindel made a face. "I can't do anything about it, you know." "Not you," said Maklo. "Me." Glorfindel met his eyes. "You may have a point there." "He left, didn't he?" "You insisted upon it in spectacular fashion, if I heard correctly." "I think I made him afraid of me." "Have you considered, I don't know, not being terrifying?" asked Glorfindel, then frowned. "I'm sorry, I was being flippant. I have not made a particular study of men in general, much less yours in particular, but I think that he would do anything you ask of him, even leaving. So don't blame him for doing what you've asked." He stood and bowed to Maklo. "Now, if you'll excuse me, Lord, someone kept me awake all night with his singing. I'd like to get some rest." "Do not mock me," Maklo whispered. "I can no more sing than I can fly." Glorfindel raised an eyebrow. "Is that so? Well, I hope that you'll show off your wings soon, then, because you can most certainly still sing. Now, do you want to go back to your bed? Makro thought of walls, and a blind terror rose within. No, he said. I don't want to stay there. Do you want clothes? I can have some soft things sent for you. Why? Maklor, I understand that you have somewhat, contentious relationship with your flesh of late, but please don't tell me that you've not noticed what you're wearing. He very deliberately did not glance down, or not, as the case may be. No? Why are you helping me? I have not been kind. Of course not. You've been nothing but unbearable since you first set eyes on me. I'm trying to bribe you into a ceasefire. He grinned, sun-bright as ever. Those honey things they make you drink are terrible to wash out. I think I owe the laundry a bit of a break. Later that day, Elrond came to him. I did not expect to need these quite so soon, but I am glad I had them made. Maklar had stayed on the terrace. None of Glorfindel's things fit. The tunics too wide in the shoulders, the breeches too short. He was a bird dressed in barred plumage, and it made him feel strange and warm. He even had a pair of boots that fit surprisingly well. Go on, Elrond said, proffering the walking sticks. Maklar took the sticks, 2 of them, with a little cuff for his arm and a handle to grasp them about hip-high. Easier than the spear? Elrond asked, as Maklar picked his way across the flagstones. Yes. Good. I'm glad to see you up and about, but do not think this as an invitation to overexert yourself. Of course. Liar, Elrond said, smiling. Maklar thought that would be enough. To move back to the slightly battered room with the window that looked out onto the cracks and sky, to wander the halls of Imladris, to walk through the valley. And it was, for a time. It was how he filled the good days. There were others that were harder. Days at a stretch when he could not leave his bed for terror, when the light of the world was too much, and the voices that followed him were louder than his own. Nights when he could not sleep, and he wandered the halls and paths of Imladris, a clumsy ghost. It was not enough, though, and he knew it. The walls were growing closer every day, the bands around his chest drawing tighter and tighter, and he couldn't even draw breath enough to scream. Arwen, too, was often sleepless, and he would stop in his nighttime perambulations to lurk outside her door, for she would sing as she worked. I know you're there, she said to him once. You can come in. His vision was clouded that night, and the warm glow of her lamp became a sparkling fog. I didn't mean... I know, she said. I don't mind. Thank you, he said. May I look? Of course. He could not make sense of the weaving, the colors running unstable before his eyes. It's beautiful, he said. My father wanted me to be a weaver. Like your grandmother? Arwen asked. Yes, he said, and he did not know why he was speaking of this. He did not know why he thought that Arwen would wish to hear it. It was expected of me, as his daughter. That must have been hard, Arwen said. It was. I was terrible at it. Impatient. Always got my weft tangled. He leaned forward a little to touch the bright threads. That isn't what I meant, she said, winding blood-red wool onto a shuttle and looking at him with eyes full of understanding. I know, he said, swaying upon his crutches. You are right. That was hard too. You are planning to leave, aren't you? Will you tell your father? Eventually, she smiled, and the shuttle flew across the threads with a rushing sound. He wouldn't stop you, you know. You aren't a prisoner. No? No. She worked the pedals and the loom clacked. Where will you go? Back to the sea, maybe. Do you mean to sail? No. Do you mean to die? Maklar had no answer for that. He hadn't thought that far ahead. He had only thought of being somewhere that no one would need to know if he simply stopped, of being in a place where he could give himself to the waves, could let the silence of the deep swallow him up. Arwen had stopped working and was watching him with her dark eyes.
Can I stay here for a while? Just to listen?
Of course. Arwen turned back to the loom and began to sing again. In the morning, he took his pack and filled it with the first things that he laid his hand to on the pantry shelves. In Elrond's study, he found a flask of poppy tonic and added that to his supplies, along with a few coins from a chest without a lock. Elrond had always been too trusting, but Makor wouldn't scold him for it now. He secured his spear to the pack and thought himself finished, until he espied the loot, the same one he'd treated so poorly, tucked away in an empty shelf. He took that too, by way of apology. It was foggy that morning. The bright village nestled in the bowl of the valley like eggs in a nest. Makor looked back only once before he set his old straw hat on his head and left Imladris. End of chapter 23. Stay tuned.